The year was 1813, and the winter in Wiltshire had been unkind, bleak, wet, and unrelenting. The wind howled across the moors as if mourning the faded glory of Pembroke Hall, its grey stone walls streaked by rain and memory alike. Within those walls lived Lady Margaret Pembroke, a woman of 40 years whose grace had grown quiet with solitude. Once, she had been the bright promise of her father's house. Now she was its keeper, an heir without celebration, a lady without courtship. Her name had long slipped from the lips of London society, surviving only in the whispered mockery of her younger stepsisters. They called her the spinster of Pembroke, with laughter sharp enough to draw blood. At dinner, amid the glitter of silver and the scent of roasted pheasant, her stepsisters, Clara and Juliana, spoke of dances, of gentlemen, of silk gowns yet to be worn. Margaret, sitting opposite in her modest dove-grey dress, listened without bitterness but with a composure that only deepened their scorn. "You would not understand, dear sister," Juliana said, feigning innocence. "You have always preferred books to ballrooms." Clara, the prettier of the two, added with a cruel smile, "Even love fears wrinkles, does it not?" The table erupted in tittering laughter. Margaret merely folded her napkin, her expression serene though her throat burned with quiet shame. "Love," she said softly, "has always feared cruelty more than time." Her words stilled the air for a heartbeat, yet her sisters quickly dismissed them, returning to their chatter of ribbons and suitors. She rose from the table without excuse and walked into the dim corridor where portraits of ancestors lined the walls, faces frozen in triumphs long forgotten. How strange, she thought, that a woman could live surrounded by family and yet be entirely unseen. The narrator might have said, if this were a tale told later, that Margaret Pembroke was born with too much mind for her age and too much heart for her world. Her father had adored her, teaching her Latin and estate matters, but after his passing, the household changed. Her stepfather, a man of fortune but not of tenderness, had remarried quickly. His daughters were creatures of charm and calculation, well suited to a society that prized youth above understanding. When he too died, leaving the estate to all three in uneasy unity, the sisters' disdain ripened into dominance. Margaret, by birth the eldest and by temperament the gentlest, became both servant and sentinel of the hall, managing its ledgers, tending to its staff, and caring for her ailing aunt who lived in a quiet chamber upstairs. Each morning she walked the grounds before the household awoke, her boots darkened by dew, her thoughts as pale as the mist over the lake. The villagers greeted her with affection, calling her Our Lady of Mercy, for she visited the sick and poor, mended roofs, and paid debts that were not hers. Yet even their gratitude could not pierce the veil of loneliness that hung about her like mourning crape. The world had decided what she was, a relic of youth's passing, and the decision seemed irreversible. It was on one such morning, after a night of relentless rain, that a servant came rushing through the gate with breathless urgency. "A carriage, my lady. It's overturned by the East Bridge." Margaret wasted no time. She gathered her cloak and lantern, ordering the stable hands to follow. The rain had not ceased. It lashed against the countryside as though determined to wash it clean of vanity. When they reached the bridge, the scene appeared ghostly: shards of wood, a broken wheel, and, lying motionless beside the wreck, a man in dark attire. His face was pale under the cold drizzle, his gloved hands stained with mud. Margaret knelt beside him. "He lives," she said firmly, hearing the faint rhythm of breath. She brushed the wet hair from his forehead and signaled the men to lift him carefully. Back at Pembroke Hall, the injured stranger was placed in the east chamber near the fire. The physician, summoned from the village, identified him with astonishment. "By heaven," he murmured, "it's the Duke of Ravensshire." The name spread through the household like a spark. The Duke of Ravensshire, Edward Blackwell, was no ordinary guest. His reputation preceded him, a man once celebrated in London for brilliance and scandal alike. He had vanished abroad after a broken engagement and the sudden death of his brother. His return to England was the subject of speculation in every drawing-room from Bath to Mayfair. And now fate, or perhaps Providence, had placed him, unconscious and vulnerable, under the roof of a woman the world had forgotten. That night, Margaret sat by the hearth in the adjoining chamber, watching over the stranger. His features were strong yet weary, the face of a man who had seen more than he cared to remember. The physician assured her he would recover. Still, she remained, listening to the storm batter the windows. When his breathing steadied, she allowed herself a small sigh, one not of relief alone, but of purpose long dormant. For years she had tended to others without being needed in return. Now, for the first time in memory, her presence mattered. By dawn, the household stirred with gossip. Clara whispered that the Duke would never acknowledge such hospitality. Juliana smirked. A spinster rescuing a duke. How poetic, how pitiful. Margaret ignored them. She arranged for broth, for linens, for quiet. Her movements were precise, dignified, as though to command respect from the very walls that had witnessed her humiliation. When at last the Duke awoke, the light of morning fell through the curtains in soft gold bands. He blinked, disoriented, until his gaze found her seated nearby, a book open in her lap. For a moment neither spoke. It was he who broke the silence. "Have I died, madam, or do angels now wear grey?" She almost smiled. "Neither, your grace. You are in Wiltshire, not heaven." He regarded her closely. "Then I am in good hands, I think." It was a small exchange, yet something within the air shifted. She closed her book and rose. "Rest, sir. You have travelled far and suffered enough excitement for one evening." Her tone was calm, her poise unshaken, but her heart was unsteady in her chest. As she left the chamber, the narrator's voice might have whispered to the unseen audience. It was on that rain-drenched night, when all the world slept, that Lady Margaret Pembroke, the woman too old for love, unknowingly opened her door to it. Outside, the storm relented. The first fragile rays of dawn stretched across the moors, glinting against the wet grass like scattered tears. Within the quiet of Pembroke Hall, a single ember of possibility began to glow, faint, uncertain, yet unmistakably alive. The days that followed passed in a rhythm of quiet recovery. The Duke of Ravensshire confined to the East Chamber while rain softened the Wiltshire fields into silver mist. Lady Margaret tended to her duties as mistress of Pembroke Hall, yet her steps carried a new awareness, an uninvited quickening that unsettled her calm. Each morning she sent trays of broth and tea, and each afternoon she inquired discreetly after his health. When the Duke grew strong enough to walk, he asked to thank her personally. She met him in the drawing-room, sunlight diffused through lace curtains, her composure unaltered save for the faintest hue of warmth in her cheeks. "I owe you more than gratitude, my lady," he said, his voice still roughened by illness. "You might have passed me by, and none would have blamed you." "I would have blamed myself," she replied simply. "One does not leave a man to die for fear of inconvenience." He studied her with quiet curiosity, the manner of a man long accustomed to beauty yet unprepared for grace. There was nothing youthful about her, no painted bloom, no studied coquetry, yet something within her steadiness stirred him. Her grey gown, her composed bearing, the intelligence in her eyes, all of it defied the frivolity that London called charm. As his strength returned, so did his inclination for conversation. In the evenings, when the lamps were lit and the fire murmured in the grate, he would join her in the library, where the scent of old paper and beeswax hung like memory itself. They spoke of travel and governance, of poetry and duty, of the strange loneliness that haunted both privilege and obscurity. She discovered in him a man wearied by flattery, drawn to truth. He discovered in her a mind that neither demanded nor deferred. It was during one such evening that he noticed the violets arranged in a small glass near the window. "You keep spring alive even in winter," he said. "They grow near the chapel wall," she answered, glancing toward the flowers. "They return each year, though no one tends them. Perhaps neglect is not always the end of beauty." He reached for one, pressing the stem gently between his fingers before setting it between the pages of her open book. "Then let this one be a token of your philosophy," he murmured. The gesture was slight, yet it carried an intimacy neither dared acknowledge aloud. By early spring, his health had mended. He rode through the estate grounds, the wind cutting through the lingering chill, while Margaret watched from the terrace with an unease she could not name. She had grown accustomed to his presence, the sound of his footsteps, the low cadence of his laughter echoing down the hall. The knowledge that he would soon depart unsettled her more deeply than she wished to admit. The household, however, had not been so silent as she imagined. Whispers threaded through corridors like draughts beneath closed doors. The servants speculated on the Duke's fondness for their mistress. The villagers, noting his frequent rides with Lady Margaret, embroidered tales of a courtship. Her stepsisters, ever alert to opportunity, seized upon it. "He must be lonely indeed," Clara remarked at breakfast, her spoon clinking delicately against porcelain. "Imagine finding amusement in our sister's company." Juliana smirked. "Perhaps he mistakes kindness for invitation. Men do, when they are bored." Their laughter carried through the open doors, where a maid lingered just long enough to hear. By afternoon, the tale had found its way to the market square, that Lady Margaret had enticed the Duke under pretense of nursing him, and that her ambition matched her age, desperate and unbecoming. When the rumor reached Margaret, she felt no anger, only the heavy ache of inevitability. Scandal was a language society spoke fluently, and she, by existing beyond its youth, had always been its chosen subject. That evening, she entered the dining room with composed dignity. The Duke was there, unaware, discussing arrangements for his return to London. The sisters joined soon after, all painted smiles and false courtesy. The conversation turned, as if by accident, to gossip from the neighboring estates. Clara feigned hesitation before mentioning a certain lady who had grown remarkably attentive to her guest. Juliana added lightly, "It is said she hopes to become a duchess before her hair turns silver." The Duke's gaze hardened. "And who," he asked evenly, "is this lady you speak of with such cruelty?" The sisters exchanged glances. "Oh, surely your Grace has heard the same whispers," Clara began, but his interruption was swift. "I have heard nonsense, nothing more," he said, his voice like tempered steel. "In my travels I have met many women praised for their youth and beauty. Few possess kindness without vanity, intelligence without artifice, or courage without reward. Lady Margaret does. If the world finds that strange, it is the world's failing." Silence followed, thick and disbelieving. The sisters stared as though struck. Margaret herself could not breathe. He inclined his head toward her, a gesture of quiet defense, then excused himself. Later, she found him by the staircase, preparing to retire. "You should not have spoken so," she said gently. "They will twist your words and make a greater scandal of them." "Let them," he replied. "I am weary of a society that mistakes cruelty for wit." His hand brushed hers as he turned to ascend. The touch lingered like a confession, though no words followed. The next morning, his carriage stood ready in the courtyard. The air smelled of thawing earth and rain. Margaret descended the steps slowly, every movement deliberate. "You are leaving," she said, not as question but truth. "For a time only," he answered. "London demands my return. But I shall not forget this place, or the kindness I found within it." She forced a small smile. "Kindness is easily forgotten amid London's brilliance." He regarded her for a long moment, then reached into his coat. From between the pages of his pocket journal, he withdrew the pressed violet she had given him. "Then allow me something to remember it by," he said, offering it to her. "Until our paths cross again." Their fingers touched briefly as she accepted the fragile bloom. The world seemed suspended in that instant. The soft rustle of the trees, the shimmer of the departing carriage horses, the unspoken ache of farewell. When the wheels rolled away down the gravel drive, Margaret stood motionless beneath the pale morning light, the violet trembling in her hand. In her heart she knew that whatever had passed between them was too delicate to name, yet too deep to dismiss. Inside the hall, her sisters watched from the window, their eyes bright with resentment. "He will forget her," Juliana murmured. "Men always do." But the narrator's unseen voice, quiet and certain, would later say otherwise, that in the Duke's mind, amid the clamor of London's return, the image of a grey-gowned woman standing in the rain would remain, an unbidden memory of grace in a graceless world, and a token far stronger than scandal itself. London, that glittering hive of ambition and gossip, was in full bloom by the height of the season. Carriages clattered along Grosvenor Square, chandeliers blazed in endless succession, and laughter rose beneath ceilings painted with mythic gods who knew nothing of restraint. Into this world, reluctant and unwilling, came Lady Margaret Pembroke. Her stepsisters had insisted she accompany them to town, ostensibly for companionship, though she knew well enough she was to serve as their chaperone, a convenient shadow to their radiance. Margaret had not set foot in London for nearly 2 decades. The air itself felt different, perfumed with artifice and competition. Her wardrobe, of modest country silks, looked out of place among gowns cut to display youth like a trophy. Yet she bore herself with such composure that heads still turned, not in admiration perhaps, but in curiosity. There was an authority in her stillness that unsettled the shallow. The Duke of Ravensshire had returned as well, his reappearance greeted by a flurry of speculation. The newspapers praised his estates and fortune, the ladies admired his stoic demeanor, and his absence from the marriage market only heightened his allure. When word reached Margaret that he would attend the Montrose ball, her pulse betrayed her. She told herself she had no wish to see him, that the affection which had kindled between them in Wiltshire was but a kindness shared in solitude. Yet when the night came, she found herself scanning the ballroom from the edge of the crowd, her heart whispering treachery against reason. He arrived late, dressed in the restrained elegance that only true confidence could wear. Conversations faltered as he passed, even the orchestra seemed to soften its tone. When his gaze met hers across the room, the noise of London faded to silence. Neither smiled, neither bowed, yet the distance between them felt suddenly narrow, fragile as breath. Hours passed before propriety allowed him to approach. When he did, it was under the guise of civility. "Lady Margaret," he greeted, voice low, as if addressing a secret. "It seems fate enjoys its amusements. Or perhaps London is smaller than we imagine," she replied, managing composure though her heart raced. "I have found it unbearably large," he said, "until this moment." Their exchange was brief, the kind that onlookers dismissed as polite reunion. Yet beneath the words ran an undercurrent, one of recognition and of longing deliberately restrained. When the dance began, he offered his arm. She hesitated only an instant before accepting. The waltz carried them through a haze of candlelight and murmured envy. His hand rested lightly at her back, his eyes never left her face. "You should not look at me so," she said softly. "And how do I look at you?" "As though the room is empty." "Perhaps it is." Her reply was lost as the music swelled. Around them the younger women glittered, their laughter bright and hollow. Margaret felt the weight of their stares, the disbelief that a woman past youth could command the attention of a duke. Yet he moved as though oblivious, as though the dance itself were a quiet act of rebellion. When the final notes faded, he bowed over her hand but did not release it at once. "Will you walk with me, for a breath of air?" The garden beyond the ballroom was washed in moonlight, the air cool and fragrant with lilac. They strolled in silence until the music became a distant hum. Only then did he speak. "I have thought of Wiltshire," he said, "more often than I can defend." She smiled faintly. "The countryside inspires many romantic notions." "I am not speaking of the countryside." His tone was soft, but the honesty in it struck her like thunder. "I have tried to forget the sound of your voice, the calm of your presence, and failed. I returned to London believing it was merely gratitude. It is not. I find no peace in a room where you are not." Her steps slowed. "You must not say such things. You will regret them when reason returns." "Reason," he said bitterly, "is the refuge of cowards, or of women who have lived long enough to see passion turn cruel." She turned to face him, her expression composed though her eyes shone. "You do not know what you risk. My reputation would not survive your kindness, and yours would not survive my name." He took a step closer, his voice a murmur of defiance. "Then let them destroy both. I would rather endure scandal than silence." The confession hung between them, suspended in the night air. She wanted to believe him, to yield to the warmth she had denied for so long, but dignity, that last fortress of the unloved, held fast. "You mistake admiration for love, your grace," she said quietly. "You will wake from it, and I cannot bear to be your regret." He looked at her for a long moment, the moonlight tracing the pain in his features. "You speak as though love were a luxury reserved for youth," he said. "I thought it a right of the living." She turned away, unable to answer. Somewhere beyond the hedges, laughter echoed from the ballroom, a cruel reminder of the world they inhabited. When she faced him again, her resolve had hardened. "Please," she whispered, "say no more. Let this remain what it was, a kindness remembered, nothing more." He bowed his head, not in submission but in grief. "As you wish, my lady." They parted without ceremony. She returned to the glittering hall, her expression tranquil, her heart in ruin. The Duke remained in the garden long after she had gone, the scent of lilac clinging to the night like a memory unwilling to fade. In the days that followed, society's tongue wagged anew. Some claimed the Duke's attention had merely been gallantry, others whispered of secret meetings and moonlit vows. Margaret ignored them all, retreating into the dignity of silence. Yet each time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice again, steady and unrepentant. "I find no peace in a room where you are not." London's season turned from spring to early summer, and with it, the world moved on to newer scandals. But in the quiet hours before dawn, when the city's noise softened to a sigh, Margaret would stand by her window, the moon pale against her face, and wonder whether courage, not propriety, had been the truer virtue that night. And somewhere across the same city, the Duke of Ravensshire stared at his untouched glass of wine, the memory of her refusal burning in his chest like a wound that would not heal. Neither spoke of it again, yet both knew that silence had not undone what was spoken in whispers beneath the lilacs, that love, once confessed, cannot be forgotten, even when denied. The summer of 1813 arrived with deceptive gentleness, soft mornings, golden fields, and skies so serene they seemed incapable of cruelty. Yet beneath that calm, scandal ripened like fruit left too long in the sun. A pamphlet, cheaply printed but wickedly effective, began circulating in London drawing-rooms. Its anonymous author hinted that the Duke of Ravensshire, England's most envied bachelor, had surrendered his good sense to a woman twice past her prime. The description was unmistakable. No name was given, yet every whisper ended the same way: Lady Margaret Pembroke. The gossip travelled faster than truth ever could. It reached Wiltshire before the week was out. Margaret, who had fled the capital months earlier to escape further humiliation, read the wretched paper only once. Her hands trembled, not from anger but from sorrow. She had feared precisely this, that kindness might be twisted into ridicule, that affection might brand her a fool. The servants spoke of the rumor in hushed tones. Her stepsisters did not bother with such restraint. "I warned you," Clara said with satisfaction. "The Duke may have pitied you, but society does not." Juliana laughed, tapping the pamphlet against her palm. A duchess at 40. Imagine it! Why, the printers themselves must have laughed as they set the type. Margaret did not answer. Words, she had learned, could not wound her more deeply than they already had. She spent her days walking the gardens alone, her evenings tending to her aunt's fading health. Yet in the solitude, she could not banish the memory of him, the warmth in his voice, the defiance in his eyes when he had said he would rather endure scandal than silence. She had chosen silence, and now it had come for her like retribution. One evening, as a storm gathered on the horizon, the quiet of Pembroke Hall was shattered by the sound of hooves on gravel. The servants, startled, ran to the windows. Through the rain-dark haze, a single rider approached, his cloak whipping in the wind. Margaret, standing by the parlor fire, felt her breath catch before her mind could reason. The door burst open, and there he was, the Duke of Ravensshire, drenched to the bone, his hair plastered to his brow, his eyes fierce with purpose. She rose at once. "Your Grace, what are you doing here?" "Seeking truth," he said, his voice roughened by rain and fury. "They told me you were hiding, that shame had silenced you. I came to see if it was true." Her composure faltered. "The world believes what it wishes. My denial would change nothing." "Then let my truth change it," he said, stepping closer. "You once feared my regard would ruin you. It has done worse. It has left you alone." The thunder rolled across the moors as if the heavens themselves bore witness. She turned from him, unable to face the intensity in his gaze. "You cannot fight society, Edward. It will crush you for even trying." "Then let it," he replied. "I have lived long enough obeying its cruelty. I will not see it devour what little good remains in me." When she faced him again, there was both pain and wonder in her eyes. You cannot mean. I do, he interrupted, his voice steady. I came to ask you what I should have asked in London. Will you give me the honor of your hand? Not in secret, not in shame, but before all who would mock us. Let them call me mad if they must. I would rather be mad in love than sane in emptiness. Her breath caught, torn between disbelief and a surge of long-buried hope. You cannot mean to. I mean to end this farce, he said, and for the first time in months, his expression softened. You once told me love fears cruelty more than time. Then let us defy both. Outside, the rain thickened into sheets, striking the windows like applause. She shook her head, tears bright in her eyes. You do not understand what you ask. My name brings ridicule. My age brings contempt. If you stand beside me, they will turn on you. Then let them turn, he said quietly. For once in my life, I would rather be right in the eyes of my heart than adored in the eyes of fools. The fire flickered between them, casting gold across his rain-dark coat. She realized then that he would not relent. The man before her was no longer the worldly noble of London's admiration, but a soul stripped of pretense, bearing the truth she had long denied herself. Slowly, almost fearfully, she extended her hand. You are too proud a man to live for anyone's approval, she whispered. But if you truly mean what you say, then yes. He took her hand, not as conqueror but as supplicant, and pressed his lips to her fingers. Then let them talk. We will give them something worth remembering. By morning, the storm had cleared, and word spread as swiftly as the wind that the Duke of Ravensshire had left Pembroke Hall with its mistress by his side, bound for London. The city buzzed with disbelief. At first, society laughed, convinced it was rumor reborn. Yet laughter turned to shock when, that very evening, the Duke appeared at the annual Fairchild Charity Ball, Lady Margaret on his arm. The music stuttered to a halt as they entered. Heads turned. Fans froze mid-motion. The Duke, unflinching, guided her through the crowd with calm precision, stopping before the host, the Marquis of Fairchild, whose expression teetered between awe and scandal. "My lord," said Ravensshire clearly, his voice carrying across the hall, "allow me to present Lady Margaret Pembroke, my betrothed." The silence that followed was absolute, the kind reserved for blasphemy and miracles alike. Then, from somewhere near the orchestra, came the faint crack of a fan snapping in two. Margaret stood poised beside him, her cheeks pale but her eyes steady, the embodiment of quiet defiance. He took her hand once more and, in full view of every gawking guest, raised it to his lips. It was the gesture that broke the spell. Whispers surged like wind through leaves, some scandalized, some awed, but no one laughed. The Duke had done what few men of rank dared. He had chosen heart over vanity. And she, once mocked as a spinster, had become a symbol of love unmeasured by youth. Later, when they stepped out into the night, London's reign had returned, gentle and silver under the gaslights. He drew her close beneath his cloak. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Never," she murmured, "though I suspect the world will." He smiled faintly. "Let it. The world has had its say for far too long." And as the carriage wheels turned through the glistening streets, the narrator's voice would one day recall that moment as England's most whispered legend, that when the Duke of Ravensshire declared Lady Margaret Pembroke his heart's desire, he did not merely choose love. He restored to it its truest dignity.